Hello, my name is Malik Abbasdab. Welcome to PM Express. It's a simple duty of walking to a polling station, getting a ballot paper, and making a decision as to who you believe is the best candidate to lead you. But it is one which hasn't proven to be quite simple. It has served as breeding grounds for us to hack each other with machetes, knives, and other dangerous implements. In Ghana, we have been spared. Elsewhere in Africa, hundreds, in fact, thousands of people have died as a result of election dispute. What is it about us that makes election such a ground for us to attack each other? When we come back from a break, I will introduce my guests who have all the answers to these questions. You're watching PM Express and we are talking elections and violence. Why are our elections grounds for violence? And why are many people dying as a result of elections? A simple act of choosing our leaders. My guests are sitting across the table is Professor Bafo Agyeman-Duah. He is a former UN Senior Governance Advisor. And to my left is Executive Director of WANEP, West Africa Network for Peace Building, Chukwu Emeka Eze. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
Let me start with Prof. You've advised the UN at the highest level in terms of governance. What is it about governance in Africa that makes elections so difficult?
Thank you, and thanks for having me here. It's a very interesting question. It puzzles a lot of people. But I think there's an answer, not the whole answer, but we have to look at the nature of the state that we have in Africa. If you look at the nature of the state and the kinds of electoral systems we have created, perhaps we can begin to understand why elections become such a very, very huge hot issue in African countries. When I talk of the nature of the state in Africa, you see, in most African countries, the state continues to be the major, if not the main source of not just income, but of power. Source of power. And power defined very broadly, and also can be defined narrowly. But when I say the state remains the main source of power, it means that, to a large extent, for most Africans to do well in their lives, they have to have a certain connection with the state, direct or indirectly. Because in most African countries, states provide most jobs. You can't do much in most African countries without going through the state.
Is this backed by the facts? Let me go to Chukwu. I'll come back to you.
Okay.
Then we can look at the facts and see whether this is backed by the facts. But Chukwu, and both of you were at the colloquium organized by the Kofi Annan Peacekeeping Training Center in Accra here. And you heard the chairperson of the Electoral Commission, Mrs. Charlotte Osei, talking about the precipice where we stand virtually every year in elections. And she listed 81 out of the 275 constituencies as hotspots. That's such a huge number. For a person in analyzing security, when you hear 81 constituencies out of 275, are you alarmed?
Well, I'm alarmed, but I think it's better to be alarmed and get prepared and not to be alarmed at all. But I also want to understand that those hotspots are based on historical antecedents. What we have done in recent time is to develop indicators, about 31 indicators, with which we are monitoring the electoral process, all issues that could lead to violence. So what that means is that at some point, some of these so-called hotspots might have to change. Our definition of risk in electoral process is the vulnerability of the community to threats. So if the threats exist and the community have the coping mechanism, then for us, that threat is limited.
And by threat, what do you mean?
For example, one threat is availability of small arms and light weapons. That's a threat. Then if you add another indicator, unemployment, youth bulge, a combination of these three could make a community or a constituency vulnerable. Okay? So if you have the threat of electoral process in that community, the tendency for that place to be a flashpoint is very high.
And let's just pick those things that you mentioned. Youth bulge.
Yes.
Proliferation of small arms.
Unemployment.
Okay. We know that since last year, we crossed the threshold into that territory of a youth bulge because we have 5.3 million youth in Ghana, and that constitutes 20% of our total population. The Small Arms Commission tell us that out of a possible 1.1 million illegal weapons, when they granted amnesty to persons to submit these weapons for destruction, only 900 turned up out of a possible 1.1 million. Now, close to 50% of the 5.3 million are unemployed. So all the three things you are talking about all check out.
Well, you would not, if you run that as a conclusion, that might be totally wrong. The first thing is that I always say this: youth bulge is not negative. It depends on how we are able to make use of the energy of these youths. Of course, unemployment is there, but then within that circle of unemployment, how many of them are vulnerable? That's another thing you need to look at. The other issue also is that when we talk about these small arms in the hands, illegal arms, in the hands of non-state actors, you cannot conclude that the entire percentage of these arms are in the hands of people that can use it to foment trouble. And that is why in the first place, people are turning in the arms. Some people are registering the arms. So of course, there are those arms that are in the hands of non-state actors that at the slightest provocation or intentionally are using it for bad intentions. And that's where it becomes dangerous.
If only 900 people turn up and hand in their weapons, would even amnesty out of a possible 1.1 million, that's paltry. But let me go to Prof. 5.3 million. You said the arrangement of our state is such that it serves as breeding grounds. Elections tend to serve as breeding grounds because there's so much power, and all the jobs available are available when you have power. Out of 5.3, we know that our civil service stands at possibly 60,000. 5.3, even 50% of that is 2.6. 2.650. 60,000 opportunities is paltry.
The issue of joblessness, certainly, I think you have to interpret it differently. It's not the fact that people don't have jobs, therefore they become prone to violence. There's a popular saying that idle hands will have to resort to something. So when young people, very strong, agile, angry and hungry, when they're on the streets, and they don't have nothing useful to do, then they can easily be persuaded by scrupulous individuals or people with the means to entice them to get into all kinds of activities. I think that's where the danger is. So we argue that where the state has failed to provide its young people the means to livelihood, then we are just, it becomes a breeding ground for people who may resort to unconventional means for making their lives. And I started by talking about the nature of the state. You see, because the state in our various African countries are so centralized, access to power, to glory, to fame in most African countries are through the government. We don't have multiple centers where people can achieve these ends. Okay? So that concentration of power makes people who control that power so powerful, if I should use the word. So everybody wants to have a piece. And as you also know, at least in our own country, we are beginning to see a pattern where when a political party wins power, its own people seem to take precedence over those who are not. So it becomes important for young people, therefore, to associate themselves very, very closely to that.
Because early this year, if I may intervene, early this year we had, I think, a deputy national organizer of the governing NDC say to people, if you contribute and the party wins, retains power, it's only those who have contributed that will benefit when the party retains power. He was condemned, he stood his grounds.
Yeah, because that's the reality, unfortunately. It's not a good reality, but that's what it is. And also, we also discovered that in our country over the past few years, those who shout the most for their parties tend to be favored when appointments.
And if I may add, former President Kufuor said that he would prefer to be a messenger in government, in a party in government, rather than the general secretary of an opposition party.
Again, that reinforces the point that we are making. And all these are not acceptable conditions, because truly, in countries such as ours, affiliation to political parties should not dictate how my future will be. So the unfortunate development, as we are discussing, is what is leading to these shrill voices when it comes time for election. Because people have to struggle to get access to power, and that is dictating. So hopefully, if we can change the nature of our politics, at least if we can even talk about changing the nature of our state, where power will not be so concentrated, where the executive will not so be empowered to control almost everything from A to Z, and there are other avenues to seek livelihood, I'm sure it will diffuse these usual tensions we have for our politics.
Emeka, you have your lenses across Africa, especially West Africa, and I'm sure you follow all the elections and all the issues that play out. Is it your view that the contestation for power is heightened by a desire to have access to opportunity and resources and all of that?
Don't forget that there's something Prof said about the state formation in Africa. It cuts across. The first thing is that most of the African states were colonized. And from that colonial period up to the point where we had what we called our own rule, independence, and then we had civilian rule. Most of these African states, again, it did not last long. So democracy did not organically emerge. So it was truncated by military rule. And then at the end of military regime, we are now moving from what I may term as a consolidated autocracy to consolidated democracy. Okay? And within that period of that movement, there's always a lot of challenges. So the first thing you notice is that people still look at the state as where people go to amass wealth. And therefore, there is no connection between the community and the state. So people look at the state as the white man's state, that which belongs to white man. And that's why you can go to the center and you grab and you are made a famous person. But you cannot take one person belonging to the community. So that's the first thing you need to notice. The second thing that Prof mentioned that I want to emphasize is the fact that it's not just about me and my political party winning power. Because of the nature of the formation of our political parties, they are either colored in ethnicity, colored in religiosity, colored in regionalism, and so on and so forth. So a loss in that election, and this cuts across the entire region and continent, a loss in that election is not a loss for your political party alone. It's a loss for your identity group. That identity could be your ethnic group, it could be your religious group, and so on and so forth. So there are a lot of identity embedded in party politics, and that erodes ideology. So it is not just about the manifesto of the party or the ideology of the party. And that is why I keep saying that so long as we are vulnerable to some of the issues around the electoral process, that pushes us to electoral violence. A lot of people are talking about hate speech, either from the media or from the political actors. But the question I ask in my reflection is, if today in Ghana, they say 1% of what they are saying in the American election, people will go to flames.
Yes.
But the fact is that they have institutions and they have developed a culture, a political culture of tolerance, that it doesn't matter what a Clinton or a Donald tells to each other. They will still move on.
And the ordinary citizens won't be too bothered.
At all. They
will
are
be
not
excited.
emotionally attached on the basis of ethnic. They are looking for ideology. So all you hear is, look, this is the ideology of the Democrats. This is the ideology of the Republicans. But in our own world, because of this process of state formation that he talked about, we did not organically emerge as a state. So
we came out of accidents.
Most of the African states cannot even understand the process through which they became a state.
The evolution was interrupted.
Artificially created.
Look at all the constitutions that cut across Africa. Most of them are copy, paste, modify. So, but if you wanted a constitution that reflects the reality of the people, that is a reflection of our true identity, then probably, just probably, we may have gone in the direction of not state democracy, but communal democracy. So even though today we have chieftaincy disputes, you still know that there is some level of attachment between the chiefs and the citizenry.
Let me pick Prof. And Prof, you are also an academic, and I was reading your book, My Ghanaian Odyssey. Why have we failed as a people to consider our own circumstances and evolve a governance system that takes into consideration our own peculiarities?
Very interesting question. Why have we failed? The easiest response for me is like we are intellectually lazy. If you listen to what my brother said, the fact that we cut and paste constitutions, it means that we are not able to sit, deeply reflect, and create something that suits our unique historical and cultural circumstances. If you look at all African democracies, he's right. We mostly copy our colonial masters' way of governance, except for the British. They didn't have a written constitution, but they do have conventions about their democracy. And Ghana, Nigeria, and other British former colonies.
We may not have copied their constitution, we copied their legal system.
Exactly, but the two come together. The constitution and the jurisprudence, they are all together. And lately, for most Ghanaians, I should say, we are even looking more to the Americans, and we are picking certain things without even thinking of picking the ethics that come along with those political values that
Absolutely.
we pick.
And that's the question I was coming to ask. Yes. Why did we copy the constitutions and didn't appear to have copied the spirits behind the provisions in the constitutions, values, integrity, honesty, and all of that?
Very excellent point. It's an issue I've been reflecting over lately, because the more you think about our failure in some respects with our democracy, the more you wonder why we have adopted these systems. Wrongly though, because as I keep saying, intellectually we have been very lazy in thinking deeply and creating our own, but there's nothing wrong with that if we can copy the right aspects of them, you see. So I think by and large, it's easier for us to cut and paste. But the difficulty there is that what we are pasting oftentimes are at variance with the actual democratic processes that will enable us to develop.
Are we poor at even copying?
We could be, because we are not even copying the right things. We are not copying the right things. And you see, the African development conundrum is huge, but I know we are not going to cover all of that. But if you stick to elections and our democratic development, clearly, there's nothing wrong for us to look deep inside our own way of life, culturally speaking, and adapting those paths that are acceptable.
Why haven't we done that? I guess that's my question.
The intellectual laziness, and also, let me give an answer quickly to that before I move on. You see, it's interesting if you look at the way he was talking about our democracy not being organic. Look at the Americans, how they developed their democracy. Before independence in 1777, it took them time for the intellectuals to engage in debate.
Vigorous ones.
Vigorous ones about how the future of their country ought to be. So the exchange between Franklin Benjamin and all these guys, and of course the British, I'm not going to go much into history, but the British had failed even to adapt those kind of ideas that emerged from the British themselves. So they were able to fashion the system selflessly. They were not even thinking of who should become the next president. They were rather thinking of what kind of state should we create that will enable all these lofty ideals from a liberal democracy, and they succeeded. If you come to our history, you notice that prior to our independence, there wasn't any vigorous intellectual discussion on the nature of the state we need to create post-independence. So when he talked about cutting and pasting, that's exactly the case. We simply cut and pasted the British system, parliamentary system. So if you go into Ghanaian history, you notice that it was somewhere after 1960 that our first president started realizing the difficulties of the kind of democracy that we have copied. So when he had problems with the opposition, he couldn't tolerate them, he decided to just find a way to negate them, and on and on. You see, all because there was no conscious efforts to develop certain systems and practices, because we failed to make the difference between what you call practice democracy and principled democracy. Principled democracy basically refers to those universal values. It's universal. You don't have to be black, white, yellow to enjoy human rights, those inalienable rights that we should enjoy. Those are the principles. But the practice of this democracy gives the differences that we detect from the British, from the Americans to the Scandinavians. They are all very different institutions, but they are all democratic. So in the same way, we could have adopted the principles of democracy, but should have created institutions based on our own history and our culture to meet those values that are universal as human beings.
Very intellectual discussion. Emeka, why, and I guess I'm asking you the same question, why have we failed to evolve a system that considered our own unique set of circumstances?
Well, like we keep repeating, the histories are not the same. And therefore, it doesn't matter how much we want to run away from the history, but the history has influenced what we're having today. But I also think that, like Prof said, it is high time we begin to move away from the legacies of some of this history that have negated our own internal development
Have
mechanism.
you seen a gradual shift?
Well, I think I always don't want to sound very pessimistic. But I think in recent times, I'm seeing
but be honest to the facts.
I'm seeing a retrogression in terms of our democratic advancement across the continent. So in places where you think they have stabilized their democracy, look at what is happening in Gabon today.
Yes.
You know, so
between Ali Bongo and Jinping.
And don't forget that Ali Bongo is one of those people that stood for what people thought was going to be a model of human rights. And Jinping is the former chair of the African Union. So for two of them to be caught in that web of violence tells you that our democracy have not arrived.
Because if you look at the closeness of the election, Ali Bongo had 59.8% of the vote. Jinping had 58.23% of the votes. That's very, very close. And this cuts across many parts in Africa. It happened in Kenya between Mwai Kibaki and Raila Odinga. The same thing happened in Ivory Coast, neighboring Ivory Coast. In our own elections in 2008, Mills had 50 point something. Nanado had 49 point something. Just slim margins. I want us to pick comments made by the EC chair, who was talking about raising concerns about what you're talking about, retrogression. She didn't quite use the same words, but she spoke about retrogression and the role that the media are playing in all of this. Let's listen to Mrs. Charlotte Osei.
Narcotics Control Board also indicate a disturbingly high and growing rate of drug and alcohol abuse in Ghana. The most affected demographic is our youth population. Now, when you add to this the existence of other simmering conflict issues, from chieftaincy disputes, land tensions, tribal and ethnic tensions, and how all this seep into our national culture, it creates a very highly volatile election conflict map. And we know that when you talk about conflict in elections, the youth are the demographic group most likely to be used. So when we put all this together, it is probably a wake-up call for all of us and time for us to do some serious reflection on where we're taking this nation to. For this year's elections, the Electoral Commission has designated 81 out of the 275 constituencies as flashpoints, or places where there is a potential for election-related violence. At this point, we believe that we require concerted effort by all political actors, by state institutions, by the media, by the security agencies, all of us working together towards a more civilized political culture and to ensure peaceful elections in Ghana. Earlier in the year, when we conducted a limited voter registration exercise, there were over 24 incidents of violence resulting in injuries and destruction of registration equipment and materials belonging to the Electoral Commission. Just last month, an office of the Electoral Commission was set on fire in a suspected case of arson, following a dispute between political parties during the continuous voter registration exercise. As Napoleon Bonaparte reminds us, if they want peace, nations should avoid the pinpricks that precede cannon shots. We have a high number of pinpricks in our nation, judging from the situation of our youth unemployment, issues of religious radicalism in the sub-region, illegal drug use. You add to that unemployment, you add to that proliferation of small arms. All the pinpricks for conflict are in place. And when you throw that into a very tense, very volatile political culture, it is time we start working to prevent the cannon shots. Around us in the sub-region, we see the devastating consequences on other nations when political leaders place their personal ambitions and sectional interests above national interests. And so today, we want to call on the leaders of our political parties to engage their supporters a lot more, especially their youth wings, and to lead the process for a peaceful electoral process. We also call on political party leaders to take responsibility for the actions of their supporters and condemn bad behavior when it occurs. As the state institution responsible for conducting free, fair, transparent, and peaceful elections, we are working very hard at achieving that.
Welcome back. You are watching PM Express. You just heard the chairperson of the Electoral Commission, Mrs. Charlotte Osei. And let me come back into the studio. Emeka, before we went on the break, you were talking about retrogression. She says political party leaders must take responsibility for the conduct of their followers, and they must engage with them. Do you see this happening? In reality, is it reasonable for us to expect that the political parties who stand to benefit from the misconduct of these young people, and in fact sometimes encourage and goad them on to perpetrate violence, that we now expect these same political parties to go and tell the people, hey, no, don't go and snatch ballot boxes any longer?
But that's exactly the call that the EC chair is doing. I think it is important that those who want to govern the states should do that through the display of what kind of character they are made of. I do not think, and it's obvious, the body language, the expression of, and the actions of these political leaders is what translates to what the youths or whoever want to fight for them will do on the street. And I think there is no excuse. Across all the political parties, there is no excuse for them to say it was our youth wing, they should take responsibility. And for me, I should also think that we should begin to develop those kind of laws that if your supporters are identified to have been engaged in violence and you do not take adequate responsibility, you should also forfeit that position that you seek to occupy. Because in the first place, I do not think that any of the political violence or electoral violence that has taken place in Africa I have not heard any political leader or any political leader sibling or any political leader kids as a victim. Look across all the continents. The current one now is Gabon. You will never hear that either the younger brother of Ali Bongo or Jinping, or you go back to Cote d'Ivoire, or you go to Kenya. It is always the very poor people that the bad governance instituted by the politicians is affecting that they become victims.
Because in fact, in Kenya and other areas like Kisumu and
the very marginalized communities,
those areas that
are where you record the highest
absolutely
death.
I want us to take a break at this point. When we come back, Prof will have his bite. Stay tuned. You're welcome back. You're watching PM Express, and we are discussing elections and violence. My guests are Professor Bafo Agyeman-Duah and Chukwu Emeka. Prof, the EC chairperson is asking the political party leaders to hold their supporters accountable, rein them in, so to speak. Is this the expectation that the political leaders will do this? Is it reasonable? Have they proven it?
Well, they haven't proven it yet, but I think I should say that I was there when the Electoral Commission chairperson was making the remarks, and she was very impressive and effective. And she really raised some very important critical issues about ourselves as a people and our country and the elections. I was very impressed by that. You see, first, she gave an interesting background to the source of conflict, the conditions that will breed conflict. Then she got into the political parties, their leaders, and how they could be responsible for the conflicts, and called on them, as you said, to take responsibility, more or less, for the actions of their followers. Because, by and large, it is these leaders who are looked up to by their followers. They follow their instructions. Now, you're asking whether this is doable, is possible. Why not? If the leaders are committed to ensuring a peaceful, safe country, it's a small thing.
Have the leaders not proven to us, Prof, that their own mantra about their belief in peaceful process and all of that, hasn't that proven to be cosmetic?
On the surface, I think you can say so. Perhaps even deeper, because at times it baffles me that after 24 years of our Fourth Republic, with 6 elections under our belt, one would suspect that elections will no longer cause fear and panic, as I read today, you see. But unfortunately, towards every election, we sit on the tinderbox. And I think we need to seriously, after this election, sit down as a people. The stakeholders, the political parties in particular, and all other stakeholders, we should examine critically if this is the path we need to continue to chart as a people. Why is it that we are always praying to God, doing all kinds of things, investing so much resources and energies to ensure peaceful elections? It's an important issue. But I think if the Electoral Commission, which is the sole referee in this kind of process, is able to build the confidence that it deserves to have with the people, if the systems are made transparent for the primary stakeholders, in this case the political parties, to have full confidence and trust in the system, I think it can go a long way in diffusing this. Oftentimes, it's the lack of trust and confidence in the electoral process, the system, that leads to all these kinds of...
And sometimes the EC itself is caught between the crossfires of these political parties, and it becomes helpless. But let me go on to the phone line and speak to the Director of Police Operations, who also has the Elections Security Task Force. He is Chief Superintendent Dr. Ben Agozo. Chief, welcome to PM Express. Chief, can you hear me? Hello, Doc.
Hello.
Welcome to PM Express.
Thank you very much.
Doc, we are talking about elections and security.
I can't hear you very well because I'm driving towards home. If you may speak a bit louder, maybe I will hear you.
Okay. I was saying that we are discussing elections and security. More often than not, the police are accused of not playing the role expected of them. That's why we have this perennial problem of having to sit on tenterhooks anytime we are having elections. Do you share the view that the police ought to be doing more?
If I got you right, you are asking or you are saying that it's being alleged that police do not perform their roles very well. That's why we have election violence. Is that right?
Yes, that sometimes the police are timid because you are afraid if you perform your duties well, you will be transferred to remote villages where there are no perks.
Well, I didn't get you right, but I mean very well. But are you asking whether? I'm not getting your question very well. Can you go over it? I'm driving. Let me stop and talk to you.
Okay, so I'll give you 5 minutes to do that. Let me come back into the studio. I'll come back to you. But that's an issue which is often raised, Chuku, about the role that the police have to play. And Mrs. Osei was talking about the centrality of security, that the EC now considers security as an integral part of the electoral process.
Yeah, it has always been that because the environment, the electoral environment is as important as any other aspect of the electoral process. But I think there is something fundamental that I want to raise. Both the EC and the police, in my opinion, in comparison to other countries in West Africa, I think Ghana is well ahead.
Okay, let me go back to the phone lines and speak to Dr. Ben Agozo. Doc, welcome back again. I was asking the question, there are those who believe that if the police played the role that is expected of them and did so without fear or favor, the level of violence that we see in our elections will be drastically reduced. Do you share that view?
Well, I don't necessarily share that view. Police have always played their role in society during elections. And let's also understand that this whole issue about electoral violence is as a result of a multiplicity of factors, okay? And it is not only the police that must play particular roles. Society and other stakeholders are supposed to play their roles. Political parties are supposed to play their roles. Civil society are supposed to play their roles. And the police are supposed to play their roles. Sometimes it's because you misunderstand our roles and you don't know, what we are expected to do and some of our limitations. Can I give you just one example?
Please go ahead.
Electoral offenses, for instance, we've been accused daily that we are not prosecuting. That is why people do the things they do. But people forget that we have a law in this country that says that police cannot prosecute electoral offenses unless upon the written consent of the Attorney General. So cases delay, and everybody says it's the police that are not doing their work. You understand? So I'm saying that we may have our own limitations, no problem. We are not a perfect institution. But the idea that because police do not do this, that's why we are having this problem, is a fallacy.
Okay, Doc, I think that the question is not just about prosecution. The question is sometimes arrest the people, detain them as you would any criminal. And if I may just cite an example as well, in the Chiriponi by-election, there were people who were shooting into crowds. The Yendi Divisional Police Commander at the time explained to Joy FM that to the extent that this was political violence, he didn't think that the police had much to do about it. If the police begin to feel that they are not empowered because you are afraid that if you take the action, the politicians will interfere, and we do know that they do that, then we will have the situation we have in our hands.
Yes, I agree with you that instance. You have just mentioned one isolated case, and that police officer may have his own reasons for doing that. May be very wrong. he should have done better than that. But that is an isolated case. And that's just one case that you've mentioned. If you had mentioned, maybe many cases, that would have been just another thing. But in many other instances, police have taken decisive action. Police have arrested even regional chairpersons of political parties and prosecuted them. And you know what I'm talking about.
Yes,
I don't want to be mentioning
I know
names.
about the Maxwell Kofi Juma one in Kumasi.
Hold on. We have come very far from that. We may have done things in the past, but we have come very far from that. We are all maturing in this democracy. We are all learning from our mistakes, and police have come very far. And we are doing things better than to be referring to 10 years ago or 15 years ago or 16 years ago.
Quickly, let's talk about this year.
We are moving forward and we are doing better than what.
Great. Let's talk about this year's elections. What is it that the police are doing to ensure that we have a better, secure elections this year than the previous ones?
Just one instance, police are realizing that this election is not just about police. It's about, security of the election is not just about police. It's about all of us. We are doing more consultation in this year's election than we have ever done. A systematic approach to dialoguing with all stakeholders. All stakeholders, think of them, and we can just mention that from civil society to political parties to even groups that we think are vigilante groups and other things. In addition to putting in place measures that we will use to deal with them decisively, we have also decided to go that way because we realize that militant approach alone may not solve problems. So we begin to talk to them and also to educate them on the fact that it's an illegal, it's an illegality in itself. Vigilantism is an illegality in itself. We have gone steps further to make the political parties, sign a communique to that effect. And a host of things that we have done. We are moving to educate the communities with our community policing system. We are moving out of the cities and other places to educate people about the adverse effects of vigilante groups and other things. These are things we are doing. And even their rights and electoral offenses and other things, we are doing more than what you think we've not been doing in the past.
My last question to you, how does the police intend to deal with suspicions of bias and unfairness, which is often, sometimes the police is criticized as being unfair and pandering to the governing party because of the constitutional arrangements that we have where the president decides who the IGP is, the IGP then decides who is transferred where. We know that the current IGP, John Kudalo, has engaged in at least 4 shakeups in the police in the last 9 months, I think. How does the police fight suspicions of bias?
Who says that the president and the IGP decide who should be where? It's a purely administrative issue. The Inspector General of Police, the Constitution is clear. He decides who should go where. And he decides based on competencies. I am the director of operations because he thinks I can do it. And I'm there. And so shake-ups are normal in every society. Even the president does reshuffling. And even in your media house, you do a lot of shake-ups here and there. Is anybody dictating to you? Is some hand somewhere dictating to you?
I guess my question...
Let's move out of that kind of thinking by saying that it is the president, it's the political party, it's somebody who dictates to the IGP. Biases are not anything that we can see in the police.
Doc, the question I was asking is, how do you convince everyone that you are fair and even-handed in your approach and that you don't beat up only opposition members when they misbehave and turn a blind eye to the misconduct of members of the governing party? How do you convince people that you are even-handed? I guess that's the question I was asking.
That specifically because at first you mixed it with postings and transfers. So now that you have left out that aspect, then I will respond to it.
Thank you, sir.
Police have always shown that we are impartial. And aside that, security agencies under the auspices of the National Election Security Task Force, by its constitution and everything, are supposed to be impartial. Because we work together with all other stakeholders in the security setup And then we have put in place mechanisms that will show that, look, if you are coming to do maybe a party function, and you come first come, first served basis is what we are dealing with everybody. Recently, remember, in Tamale, the MPP wanted to hold a function. The NDC wanted to hold it.
The Dimia protest, I remember that.
At the end of the day, it was the MPP had DS, and the NDC had DS in another suburb of the city. That tells you the kind of impartiality that we are talking about. We do not say it is the MPP or it is the NDC. We go according to who comes first, and that is it.
I guess we'll leave it here.
We have shown that we have provided all of them with bodyguards and everything. So I wonder where the impartiality will come. But we have also gone beyond just showing partiality. We have shown beyond, concrete evidence that, look, police are going to be very impartial. We are going to deal with everybody fairly.
I guess we'll leave it here. Thank you, Doc. Dr. Ben Agwozo is a Director of Police Operations, and he's the head of the Election Security Task Force. Let me come back into the studio and talk to Prof. and Emeka. Does the answers he gave, do they give you a certain hope that this year we will see a change in terms of policing and the ballot and security of the elections generally? Let me start with Prof.
Actually, I was fortunate to be in the syndicated discussions with the chief superintendent that you just spoke to.
Okay.
And I was pretty impressed by the measures that they seem to be taking this time around. Because the elections security task force that he has comprises various stakeholders, and they discuss the deployment to places that they've designated as hotspots. In fact, the police has, I think, 5,000 areas, yes. And the Electoral Commission, of course, has 7,000 in the 81 constituencies that you mentioned. And I think the issue of how do you deploy the few personnel they have across this wide space, in the country. And they seem to be putting certain measures, patrolling, and all kinds of things. So I think, by and large, we can expect a better performance on the part of the police this time. But the point you raise about impartiality or biases in the application of law, I think there's a big general impression out there that is not the case. So I think the challenge is up to the police to prove the public wrong by how they conduct the affairs as we go towards the elections.
Emeka, I'm sure you also have your own hotspots that you are looking at. How is this year shaping up so far? We have done limited registration. There were a couple of issues. We did exhibition. There were a couple of issues. How is it? How are things shaping up?
I think whether it's at the level of the Electoral Commission or at the level of the police or at the level of the judiciary, I think one thing is very clear. These are not perfect institutions. But I also think and feel strongly that more than 80% of the accusations given to these institutions are perceptions. And they are inbuilt within the political process in Ghana as part of the campaign messages, and you don't even know where it stops. And let me give you an example. I think and feel strongly that for any political party or any politician to engage non-state actors as bodyguards or vigilante group, I think is extremely very wrong. Because it's either you are in government or you are aspiring to be in government. And then there's a state institution called the police. You should be the first person to develop and demonstrate faith in those institutions. And therefore, if the police is telling us that they are fair to all politicians, that they have given everybody bodyguard, if they are not proving the police wrong, I see no reason why these politicians that are in government or are aspiring to be in government should continue to use non-state actors. At the end of the day, they are building an army of youths that the extent to which they can go with the weapon, they have empowered them to acquire. The extent to which they can go, they cannot even control it. And when they can no longer see anybody as a prey, they will come back to them. And this is very wrong for the growth of a society. We should all condemn that. The other thing is that the media should also take some level of responsibility. And I think at every point and every meeting, the media has been mentioned. Yes, you can argue very well that a lot of media houses in Ghana, they are professionals. But there are ones that their conduct is nothing but below standard. Below standard.
But is that not the curious arrangements we have? If a politician acquires a frequency and sets up a radio station, obviously with political motives, and we know them, the agenda is to prosecute or persecute their political opponents and defend and protect themselves even when they are wrong.
Unfortunately.
Do you classify that in classical terms as media?
Unfortunately, they are all media. Unfortunately. Because the same thing that we are all looking for, which is to open the information space, to give citizens the platform for participation, is also the same thing that is now against us. There are several countries in this our region that you and I know that you cannot even interact via social media. That we condemn seriously. But where we now have the open and luxury space for our interaction, we are the same people abusing it. And I think it's important that we all understand that politicians do not make a significant percentage of the population. And therefore, we as citizens should have more stake in how these societies are governed than even the politicians. And one of it is to begin to develop this stubbornness among even media practitioners to say, if you do not want me to practice my profession the way I have learned it, I'll give it up. Of course, in the long run, in the short run, there will be no job for you. But in the long run, I think you'll be a better citizen.
How many people will care if I wake up one day and decide that, well, there are some journalists sitting at some politically tainted media house somewhere and they're making reckless comments and that I'm going to leave my job? Who cares?
Is the difference between expertise, professionalism, and cutting corners?
Prof, it will not make a dent. I think that we should rather stay and show the way that there's a way to do this better. And the ordinary citizens must, look, the media people, they are not charities. They do the things that they do because they want eyeballs for TV, they want listenership for radio.
Sure.
If the citizens don't listen to them, they will change.
Well, just a quick one on the earlier comment about the private security for politicians or political parties. It cuts across board because we have already talked about these so-called vigilante groups that all the political parties
and both parties have that.
So it's not just one that
both parties
to recruit. So both parties. So we need to condemn that. And I think it's getting into the realm of the media. And today the Electoral Commission chairperson was quite strong on the media, that the media have been setting the agenda. And unfortunately, most of the issues you guys pick to set the agenda are not the proper issues that helps peace.
In fact, sometimes we don't set the agenda. It's the people, the panelists, and the serial callers, a string of them who do that. But I have 2 minutes. Let me split the 2 minutes between both of you. Prof, how do we get out of this quagmire and get to that point where people just go and vote and go home and not care about what the outcomes are?
First foremost is to have the electoral system that is believable, have the full confidence of the people, which means that the Electoral Commission is challenged to make that happen. Second, higher education is needed. Oftentimes, people act in certain ways because they are not well informed. Third, media, I should mention the media, because whether you like it or not, you are very powerful and you are influencing all kinds of thoughts in this country and elsewhere. So the media also has to develop a certain discipline that is pro-peace, pro-nation, but not the parochial ends that, like my brother said, some of the media houses are seeking. And I think I should also say that, and not too long ago, the former chairman of the Media Commission, Ambassador Blair, Blair Amihia, he made an important point. He said, look, one of the biggest challenges we face as a democracy is to have political parties owning media. stations that are set up purposely by politicians to propagate the
but
agenda.
there's not much we can do about that.
We can if we talk about it and find ways to regulate.
A few seconds, Chuku. How can we get out of this?
First of all, is that beyond all that Prof have said, I have my faith in the people of Ghana to deliver. However, I think that the first thing we need to do is that we as citizens, the politicians, across all party lines, they should be the first to demonstrate that they have faith in the state institutions to conduct this election free, fair, and transparently. The second thing is that instead of looking for how they accuse the Electoral Commission or the police or the media, I think they should focus their attention on collecting evidence that is going to be important for them tomorrow.
Because the name of the game is evidence. Gentlemen, thank you. Professor Bafo Ajman-Duah and Chuku Emeka Eze. God willing, we will bring you another exciting discussion. I have been educated. It's been exciting. My name is Malik Abbas Dabu. Bye-bye.